Hi everyone, Mr. Tobin here again, and in this video we're going to look at another of Paul Durcan's poems, this time The Difficulty That Is Marriage. We will first look at a bit of background to the poem, then I'll go through it line by line before giving you some high-level analysis of the ideas behind the poem to use in your essays. So, Paul Durcan married his wife Nessa in 1968. They were married for 16 years before separating in 1984. Other poems on the Leaving Cert syllabus talk directly about Nessa, and Durcan has written many other poems about relationships in difficult situations or relationships ending. He's written many of these poems from different perspectives and narrative voices. Sometimes he writes as the woman in a relationship, other times the man. What is fairly constant throughout all of this is that when he seems to be referring to his own relationship, the blame is always one-sided. He shoulders all of it, and this leaves him with an awful lot of guilt. In this poem, we will see this explicitly, and there's also a reference here to Durcan's troubles, and this could refer to depression, which Durcan has experience of and has written about elsewhere. For a more detailed background on Durcan, check out my introduction to Paul Durcan video. The link is in the description below. So let's begin by having a read-through of the poem. We disagree to disagree, we divide, we differ. Yet each night as I lie beside you and you are far away curled up in sleep, I array the moonlit ceiling with a mosaic of question marks. How was it I was so lucky to have ever met you? I am no brave pagan proud of my mortality, yet gladly on this changeling earth I should live forever if it were with you, my sleeping friend. I have my troubles, and I should always have them, but I should rather live with you forever than exchange my troubles for a changeless kingdom. But I do not put you on a pedestal or a throne. You must have your faults, but I do not see them. If I were with you, I should live forever. Some points before we begin our close reading. This poem is a sonnet. A sonnet is a 14-line poem. This type of poetry has been around for a very long time. Shakespeare was one of the most famous users of the sonnet form, and they are most often used when exploring the theme of love. Generally, the sonnet follows a strict rhyming pattern, and in the 9th line, there is a volta, or a turning point, where the problems outlined in the first section, the first 8 lines, are resolved in lines 10 to 14, the last 4 lines. We would call this poem a loose sonnet, or based loosely on the sonnet form, as it does not have a set rhyme scheme, or indeed a particularly strong volta. Nevertheless, it's interesting that Durcan would choose such an established and famous poetic form for his exploration of a difficult marriage. So let's take a look at the poem in detail. The first 3 lines: we disagree to disagree, we divide, we differ. Yet each night as I lie in bed beside you and you are far away curled up in sleep. So the opening of this poem is contradictory. The saying is, we agree to disagree. And here Durcan plays on that and uses the alliterative D sound to really emphasize the point. We disagree to disagree, we divide, we differ. The alliteration emphasizes the difficulty they are facing. They are not on the same page, as it were. And at night, when they are in bed, she is far away from him. Now, unless their bed is enormous, it's going to be hard for her to be that far away from him while they're sharing the same bed. So this is meant metaphorically. They are physically close to one another, but the difficulties in their relationship mean that they are far apart symbolically. Yet, despite the appearance of division and separation, there is still hope. Notice the speaker repeats the word we 3 times in the opening line, and they retire each night to the same bed. So in spite of their differences and difficulties, it appears that they are still a unit. They are still together. Lines 4 to 8. I array the moonlit ceiling with a mosaic of question mark. How was it I was so lucky to have ever met you? I am no brave pagan proud of my mortality, yet gladly on this changeling earth I should live forever if it were with you, my sleeping friend. While his wife sleeps, the husband lies awake, staring at the ceiling and covering it in question mark. He asks himself, how was it I was so lucky to have ever met you? This is interesting because after they have disagreed to disagree, after their arguments or their difference of opinion, while they're in bed, he realizes that he is lucky to be with this woman, and yet they argue and fight. Perhaps this is what he is referring to in the title, the difficulty that is marriage. He loves her, he wants to be with her, but that doesn't mean that everything runs smoothly. In line 6, the speaker says, I am no brave pagan proud of my mortality. Here he is saying that he is not brave enough to believe that there is nothing after death. He believes in heaven, but he would give up going to heaven if it meant staying with his wife. The word changeling refers to a substitute, something that takes the place of something else. He would happily give up a permanent heaven for the inconsistency of earth if it meant being with her. I find the phrase sleeping friend interesting too. It seems he can get on with her and admit that he loves her, only when she is asleep. I have my troubles and I shall always have them, but I shall rather live with you forever than exchange my troubles for a changeless kingdom. The reference here in line 9 to troubles is a reference to the mental health struggles, particularly depression, of the poet, and the acknowledgement of the fact that he will always have them is telling. It is perhaps these troubles, as he puts it, that cause the difficulties in the marriage. He is clearly in love with his wife, and yet there are problems. The speaker reiterates the idea from the previous lines that he would rather live with her forever, even if it means having troubles or ups and downs, rather than lose her, but live a life where he doesn't have those things. But I do not put you on a pedestal or a throne. You must have your faults, but I do not see them. If it were with you, I should live forever. These last lines are an attempt to convey the message to the reader that he is not idealizing her or trying to pretend that she is perfect. To put someone on a pedestal means to raise them up as an example and to look up to them as if they were perfect in some way. Similarly, he says he's not putting her on a throne, lifting her up higher than others as if she's royalty. But the next line undercuts all of that. He says that even if she does have faults, he doesn't see them. This then raises the question of what the difficulties in the marriage are all about. If he thinks she's perfect, he is madly in love with her and wants to be with her forever, then the difficulty must lie with him. He must be the problem. Some critics have had difficulty with what they see as self-pity in some of Durcan's poetry, especially the Nessa poems or poems about his marriage. There is an element of that here. He is depicting himself as the problem in the marriage, that his wife is perfect. The last line is interesting in that all the words are monosyllables, except for the last one. Monosyllabic means one syllable, and it can be effective in delivering profound or meaningful ideas. W.B. Yeats does this in some of his poetry too. It is a fitting end to a love poem such as this. So some poetic techniques that we can look at, that you can talk about in your essays. So this poem is a sonnet, a form of poetry usually reserved for discussing or exploring love. That is exactly what Durcan delves into here, his deep and lasting love for his wife. But he does it from the standpoint of a marriage being difficult. He introduces a contrast intentionally between everlasting love on one hand and the day-to-day reality of a relationship or a marriage on the other. Throughout the poem, he paints himself as the difficulty, as the problem in the marriage. Whether we regard this as overly self-pitying or simply an honest appraisal depends on each reader. One thing that we could say in relation to that is at the beginning, there is talk of we. They are having problems, but they are still a unit, they're still together. But much of the rest of the poem deals with I, the poet talking about himself. It's a necessary preoccupation of the poet to be focused on themselves and their poetry to the exclusion of all other things. Perhaps this is reflective of the difficulties they face in their marriage. We know that Durcan and his wife separated in 1984, but this poem was written long before that. Perhaps these are early signs of the difficulties that they will face in their future. Just finally, there is another Durcan poem that comes to mind when reading this one. It's not on the Leaving Cert syllabus, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but it's a useful comparison, so I'm going to go through it just briefly. The poem is called Raymond of the Rooftops, and it's about a husband who is too busy writing a story to help his wife repair the tiles on their roof. All she wants is for him to hold the ladder, and when she asks, he roars back at her to leave him alone, that he's trying to write. The subtext is that she's trying to do practical things, like repair the roof on their home, while he's busy writing a fairy tale. Perhaps there's a connection to this poem in the way the roles of the husband and the wife are outlined. The husband is so busy writing poetry and being a poet that, although he can see no fault in his wife and has nothing but love for her, he's unable to see the cracks in their relationship begin to form and widen. I hope that you found this video useful, and if you haven't already, please check out some of the other Durcan videos on the channel and subscribe. Also, leave a comment, a request, or a suggestion.